December 20th, 1860. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union. With Tennessee joining the Confederacy on June 8, 1861, the Confederacy was made up of 11 states in total, still allowing slavery within them. The Confederate Army began to gain momentum, defeating the Union Army in many key battles. President Abraham Lincoln knew a drastic change had to occur in order to change the outcome of the war. Lincoln's resolution, the Emancipation Proclamation, was the beginning of the abolishment of slavery, with the hopes that freed African American men would enlist in the Union Army. President Lincoln wasn't successful in recruiting African American men, so in the summer of 1863, Lincoln met with abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Before this meeting, Douglass refused to help recruit African American men into the Union Army. Douglass voiced his opinion in his newspaper, stating that African American soldiers were underpaid, sent on dangerous missions, and faced being sold back into slavery if captured by Confederate soldiers. All three issues were true, as African Americans were paid much less, fought in more dangerous battles, and many were captured and sold back into slavery. When arriving to the White House in August of 1863, Douglass was expecting a hostile environment because of what Douglass had previously said about the president. Instead, Douglass was greeted with great hospitality. Lincoln and Douglass discussed the matters, and by the end of their meeting, Douglass decided to help recruit African American men into the Union Army. Douglass wrote, "I was not entirely satisfied with his views, but satisfied with the man. Then I determined to go on with recruiting." The Emancipation Proclamation allowed African American men to enlist in the Union Army and Navy. Many governors in the North were given the authorization to form black regiments for the Union Army. The first and most famous black regiment was the Massachusetts 54th Infantry Regiment, also known as the Glory Regiment. Douglass was able to recruit two of his sons, Lewis and Charles, into the 54th Infantry Regiment. The 54th Infantry Regiment is famously known for their act of heroism at the Battle of Fort Wagner. Because of the location of Fort Wagner, the fort was very difficult to take control of. Many white Union regiments would not charge upon Fort Wagner due to it being a suicide mission. This didn't deter the 54th Regiment, who led the attack upon the fort. Half the regiment's men were killed or wounded during the attack, including its commanding officer, Colonel Shaw. Although the Union failed in the attack, it encouraged enlistment and mobilization of African American troops. Douglass advocated for the recruitment of African Americans in both speeches and newspaper entries. In his own newspaper, the Douglass Monthly, he published "Men of Color to Arms," "Why Should a Black Man Enlist?" and many other articles. Douglass traveled the North, stating the importance of enlisting in the Union Army. Frederick Douglass had an instrumental role in the recruitment of African American men in the Union Army and Navy. The recruitment of African American men led to the Union victory in the Civil War. Before the Emancipation Proclamation, the Confederacy was winning the Civil War. While the Union Army had more battle victories, the Confederate Army had more important victories. This caused the Union to reevaluate their options, which ultimately led to the Emancipation Proclamation. After the Emancipation Proclamation and the acceptance of African American men into the Union Army, Union victories started to rise. The Union just didn't win more battles, but they also won the battles that mattered more. Frederick Douglass had one goal in mind, and that was to end slavery in the United States. Douglass and Lincoln both saw each other's passions for their own goals. Together, Douglass and Lincoln were able to win the Civil War and eventually abolish slavery in the United States.